Welcome to scaling personalization to mass proportions in record time. So this topic is near and dear to me. This topic actually came up, I want to say 3 to 4 years ago, when initial articles started coming out questioning the value of personalization, questioning the ROI of personalization, putting doubt into the minds of businesses and companies about the ROI, and really, is it really worth it? Is personalization, is that a myth? At that point, I was scaling a commerce practice at one of the SUGCON partners, and in commerce, digital natives live and breathe by personalization. So I knew that was not a fad. I knew that was not a myth. So I started digging into the reason behind all those things, and what I realized is that some of the things that stop companies from scaling personalization, expanding personalization massively, are the same reasons that prevent organizations from growing in general. So that was very interesting to me, because I lead the SUGCON practice, from the go-to-market strategy, from technology strategy. So growth is my passion. Growth is my favorite word. So when I drew that parallel, that really got me interested in that. And what I started noticing recently, over the years, we've developed internally at the company I work for right now, we've internally developed frameworks, methodologies, templates, things that we used ourselves to grow, and then we sort of ate our own dog food. We've experimented, we've succeeded in some ways, we failed in some ways, that helped us adjust in many ways, and then after a couple of years, we started taking that to our clients. And what I recently noticed, just about last year, when I was talking to Rob Hofstadler, if you guys are familiar with him, at SUGCON, what we found is that SUGCON customers, when they get on SUGCON Personalized, they experience the same problem. They struggle to get past that handful of personalization use cases, those initial obvious ones, right, that we know are going to work for sure, and then they struggle to go past that. Right? So in this session, I'm going to cover the techniques, the methodologies, the templates. These are real-world templates and applications that we've sort of developed ourselves internally. I've developed some of those things myself, and through the whole process, I ate my own dog food, so to say, right? So don't hesitate to ask any questions. Let's dig in. My goal that you guys walk out of here understanding how to bring the change back to your companies, whether you're working for a SUGCON partner, how to roll that out for your clients, or if you're a SUGCON client, how to really scale that within your organization, really drive that value out of SUGCON Personalized, because it really is a great tool. So here's what we'll talk about in the next about 30 to 40 minutes. So we'll start with an introduction to experimentation-powered personalization. And really what you'll see is there's not going to be a whole lot about personalization in this session, but more on experimentation, how to get to the point where you can have now tens, hundreds, or even thousands of personalization use cases, right? So now we'll talk about the two parts of getting to it. One is the ideation process, right? Creating the ideas, that engine, the always-on idea generation engine to power the experimentation, and then cost-efficient execution, right? In fact, when I first started looking into the problem with personalization, the surface problem was cost. It's not really the cost. It's actually the ideation is the biggest bottleneck that organizations experience, right? So we'll talk about both. So if we haven't met, my name is Vasiliy. I'm a VP of Digital Solutions at Altudo. So I've been in cyberspace, for over 16 years, specialized across all SUGCON products. This year, I'm honored to get my 10th MVP, and I've been an MVP over 3 categories: technology, commerce, ambassador. I've been leading SUGCON practices in the US for the past 9 years, and really at heart, I'm a MarTech enthusiast, and I love solving business problems with creativity and technology. Right, so for the past couple of years, I've been spending most of my time with XM Cloud, Azure, and AI. You got to get the AI in, right, somehow. So if you have any questions about what you're going to see today, so there's some ways to get a hold of me. I'm on social, I'm on Slack, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. Feel free to send me a quick email. Send me a note through my personal website, sameasbestpractices.com. And speaking of MVP, on this 10th year anniversary, this is something I'm doing myself. This is my personal initiative. It's just a way for me to give back to community. You may have noticed little squares thrown around everywhere on tables with 30-minute and 60-minute sessions. So if you would like to get a second view, an opinion, maybe run some things past me. Being in the psycho space for so long, there's little that I haven't seen, honestly. Lately, I've been looking into competitive analysis of psycho products to what else is there in the MarTech stack. So if you have some general questions about Psycor, best practices, the outlook on the MarTech industry, how Psycor stacks up, 30-minute session is probably the best time slot to book. If you would like me to take a look at your current Psycor implementation, book 60 minutes with me. We can do that remote or in person. Again, no strings attached. This is my personal initiative, just giving back to the community. All right, so let's dig in. Oh, a couple housekeeping items. So throughout the presentation, you'll see some things come up in the top right corner, marked as a tip. These are little helpful tips that you want to pay attention to. And usually what I also do is in my presentation, I add these little camera icons to slides that I think are especially important. So if you were to take pictures of any slides, I think those would be the ones that you want to take back with you. So let's jump right in. What is personalization? What is experimentation-powered personalization? Right? Starting with personalization, companies, especially those who haven't been doing personalization for an extended period of time, start off with basic use cases. We all know the ad hoc if A then B, right? Simple use cases. If visitor does that, then show this. Simple use cases. Even predictive personalization that's in Psycor XP that's been around, that's also sort of basic. It's really difficult to move past that. What usually happens is we implement a handful of experiences, a handful of personalization experiences, especially the obvious ones. Let's say if we have predefined user audiences or segments, we know what they're interested in, so we try to give that information to them. That's basic, that's pretty simple. And then we get stuck. And the reason why we get stuck is multifold. It's stemming from the lack of knowledge about your user segments, about their intent, lack of insight into their intent, lack of understanding user audience. Also, the KPIs that you may personally have as a marketing strategist, for instance, you may have some short-term KPIs that prevent you from focusing on long-term vision, budgets, and so forth, right? So for multiple reasons, ultimately, folks are holding back from trying new things, right? You're not sure if something is going to work, and you're not quite sure of how to do that in the way that doesn't impact your KPIs and things are looking good so you sort of let it stay there. And what usually happens is when you get on a platform like Psycor XP or Psycor Personalize, you end up using maybe 5 to 10% of the capabilities of the platform. Over time, you don't end up using any of it. Eventually, someone from finance comes down and starts asking questions, right? And then you move on to something else, a different platform. So the way we want to overcome that barrier is through experimentation. So in this session, we'll spend most of our time in that process circle. And that's where you really want to start. You want to understand what it takes to get the personalization going, what it takes to scale that, how to get going, how to get started. And then, obviously, we're working with the website tool, and based on both, we select the right tool for the job. And see, the good thing with Psycor Personalize is that not only it can help us power experimentation, it can help us also translate the experimentation into personalization, right? So the way this works is we create an idea, a hypothesis for an improvement based on the goals that we're tracking on the KPIs. So we plan out, we create a backlog of ideas, right? And then we test those ideas out, we analyze, we may have a winner in that split test, and that's what we mean by experimentation, is really running split tests. Or A/B tests, multivariant tests, right? Comparing one version of a component, let's say, or display or content to another, or a style, right? There are multiple things that we can experiment with. And then taking the winner and turning the winner into a permanent personalization use case. So if we can create that continuous inflow of ideas through the process of experimentation, if we can do that cost efficiently, quickly, and scale in a way that's scalable, then we're rapidly now enabling a large number of personalization use cases. Okay? So if we can create that sustainable engine on the left side, we're never going to have a problem on the right side. All right, so in the remaining of the presentation, I'm going to spend a lot of time on the ideation phase. I think this is the most important piece. We want to make sure that we have a constant inflow of ideas. Then we're going to move on into the testing phase. I'll talk about talk about the learnings that we had over the years of how to reduce the cost on experimentation, specifically with psycho-personalized. The analyze step is pretty straightforward. You have a winner, you don't. Right? You have a winner, you move it on into the always-on personalization use case. If you don't have a winner, you may decide to tweak and run another iteration on that experiment and continue iterating. There are some caveats there, some gotchas, because we don't want to experiment ourselves to the grave out of our budgets. So there's a way to do some math to calculate those ahead of time. So let's jump into the planning phase. So this is the most important phase of experimentation. What we found is it is actually really hard to get people to come up with new ideas. You think it would be easy. As a marketer, you could be thinking of many ways to personalize things. You're just not sure if what's going to work or not. So as a marketer, you just might need the framework to select the right idea. But once you get through that initial set that you have in your head, you realize that it's actually really hard to generate new ideas that are meaningful. And the way to do that is to scale the channels that bring new ideas into the company. So for instance, this is actually the framework that we use internally at our company. This is an exact framework that we use internally at our company. So we have folks who bring information from all the channels that you see here on the left side. We have folks attending industry conferences, like SUGCON, for instance. So I'm going to be bringing some new information back into the company. We have partnerships with Gartner, Real Story Group. We're constantly pulling down their reports, and we're making those reports accessible for everyone in the company. We're participating in hackathons. We subscribe people to digital newsletters so they continuously get the updates on what's happening in the MarTech space, right? We're establishing partnerships. We're serving. We're user groups, meetups, and so forth, right? So we're out there in the market continuously pulling the information in. So that information turns into ideas, and what we do is we put that into a hypothesis backlog. And then we put that hypothesis backlog through a validation process. We'll cover all these in more detail. We use a framework that's called, we call ICE. It's impact, confidence, effort. So we score the hypothesis based on that. We put it through a logical statement validation, and then the winners become experiments, and the winners within experiments become personalization use cases, and on and on and on. So that flywheel just keeps on turning. So the trick is to kickstart that engine quickly, efficiently, and get that wheel turning as fast as you can, and then scale out. Okay? So let's talk about that. So let's look at the left side. Idea intake and hypothesis selection. The idea intake is perhaps, again, the most important process. We want to create an environment where people feel safe in proposing the ideas. It's actually really hard for someone to come out and propose an idea that they're not sure about, right? Obviously, people might be worried about their reputation. They might be worried about that their idea may not be good enough, right? For a variety of reasons, people will not come forward. And in fact, when you start that process within the organization, you realize you actually won't get a lot of traction at first. People will hesitate, right? So we want to create a safe environment for people to want to come out. And the way we would do that is by promoting learning versus achieving the old, we call them legacy goals, of specific dollar-related outcomes, conversion-related outcomes. We want to treat success and failure the same way in the experimentation, and we call that a learning. So we're promoting a learning culture. We're promoting curiosity. We want people to want to figure out if their idea is good or not, and that will allow them to come forward with it, right? Once we have the idea intake, a good problem to have is a massive backlog of ideas. So once you have that, the next problem you're going to run into is trying to curate those ideas, trying to figure out which ones should I turn into an experiment and eventually into a personalization use case. So this process needs to be quick, transparent, and clear for multiple reasons. First of all, it has to be quick because we want to come back to the idea generators, the authors of the idea, as soon as possible with the feedback. In fact, ideally, we want that right side to be fully transparent all the way through, where idea generators initially will just be idea generators, helping generate ideas. The people creating tests, curating ideas, will likely be a small core team, 1 or 2 people, once you just get going. It could just be you, right? As you're curating ideas. But the idea generators need that feedback to come back as soon as possible. If we prolong that feedback loop, they're going to get demotivated. They're not going to submit an idea ever again. Also, the same thing will happen if they get the feedback, but it's not clear. Let's say their idea got denied. And if there's no clear, transparent process, they simply will be demotivated from submitting another idea, right? So the two sides work together, right? And that is really the tricky part about it, because all of this requires an experimentation culture to be created within that core group at first, and then scaled out to the company. Right? So you see a couple labels here, a couple logos, Asana logos. That's a tool that we use internally for bringing ideas in and for curating ideas. There are many other tools that you can use. That's just what we use. I have no association with the tool. It just happens to be the tool in the organization. It happens to fit the job, right? So you could have multiple other tools. You could even use an Excel spreadsheet to get going, right? Don't get stuck on the process. Don't get stuck on the tool. Focus on speed and agility, right? Start off with 1 or 2 people. In fact, the cultural change is going to be your biggest challenge here, because we're now having to change the behavior and the thinking of people on the marketing team, right? So we now have to bring new capabilities, new KPIs, new processes, new structures, and when you start small, structures and processes aren't going to be that big of a deal. You can experiment, but as the team grows, as you scale that to organization, you want to have those things in place right away, right? So here's some tips on how to change the organization. So start small. Start with 1 or 2 people, right? Create a core team. You could be the team of 1 from the get-go, right? And go through the process end to end. Create an idea, validate it yourself, go through that process mentally on paper, and then create an experiment and then analyze it, right? Go through that cycle. Go through a few cycles. Then start scaling that to another person, right? Get them trained. And then you'll be starting off with, let's say, 1 or 2 people, right? That's all it takes to get going. And as you go through that process, you realize that some of the things that I'm going to show you may or may not fit your company fully, right, based on your processes and culture. So you'll start making changes and adjustments. That's critical to make those as soon as possible before going out to a larger audience. So we'll talk about that, because that's what you'll need to get into that 1,000x number of personalization use cases, right? So start small. Use the Galbraith model here for creating change. It is often that we simply expect people to change by asking them to do certain things. Change depends on multiple things. So first of all, you want to make sure that you have the right people. People come first, right? You want to lean into those who are motivated, who are interested in experimentation, who have that mindset. If you work in a large team, pick the person who constantly brings news to the table. Hey, have you heard this? Did you know about that? Hey, did you watch this summit? Did you guys know? So the person that constantly brings new ideas, that's the person you want to lead. Because that's a critical capability that you're going to need in the core team. So once you have the right people, structure comes second. You want to start flat, obviously, right? When you scale, you can create a structure in that experimentation team, especially if you get really serious with experimentation, running 1,000+ personalization use cases. You need a bit of structure, right? You need workflows, you need approvers, reviewers, right? Start small first. But what you do want to have is direct access to either a CMO and a CIO. You need direct access to those people, because with experimentation, you are going to need help from technologists eventually. So even if you're a marketer and directly reporting into a CMO, there could be, I would recommend setting up a matrix reporting structure where you, let's say, dotted line into a CIO, someone on the technology side with influence over developers. Because there will be a time, and it might be sooner than you think, that you need their help, and you need to move quickly. And you just simply won't have enough time to go through the normal backlog, right, the normal process. So you want that direct channel. Rewards, that's an important one. So we want to move people away from focusing on success and failure and focusing on learnings. What you do want to measure is velocity of learnings, number of learnings. That's your new KPI now. Not the successes or failures, but the number of learnings. And it's going to be uncomfortable, I'll tell you. It's going to be, because management wants results, right? Management wants outcomes. You want conversions, you want engagement, right? You want those KPIs. Coming back to them and saying, hey, this is something that I want to measure instead, it's probably not going to fly, right? So add it as a new KPI at first, and then start slowly replacing other KPIs with it. So don't boil the ocean at first, right? Just introduce, get the CMO, especially if the management is not familiar with the concept. Just start slow. Just, hey, let's try it out. Let's just add that in. Let's replace this and let's see how it goes, just for me. I'm willing to put my, if you have variable pay that works well, I'm willing to put my variable pay on it. And it will work. So it's a behavioral adjustment that you got to make. And that's why I was saying this is probably the hardest thing to do. It's going to be scary, it's going to be uncomfortable, because you'll be failing a lot in experimentation. And that, 1 out of 3 is the best case scenario for success rate. So get used to failing, and that's why we want to make sure that we're not measuring failures or successes, we're measuring learnings. With a failure or success, you have a learning, and that's a benefit, right? So if you failed, now you know a way that didn't work, you can adjust it, you can tweak it, but you can just continue growing and growing and growing. And with growth, results will follow. It will take some time to get the results, though, at least a couple of quarters, like, for you to really get your head around it, scale it to the point where you can start seeing real results, right? Of course, depending on the traffic and the website, and your mileage will vary, but don't expect results right away. Give it some time. Ask your management to, let's say, for at least 3 to 6 months of runway, right, to show something valuable as an outcome for this. So here's some best practices here. As I mentioned, start with a set core of people. Send people to conferences. You're here, so you definitely got that one down. Provide fast feedback to idea authors. Give transparency. Don't ask for a lot of information when you ask for ideas. Make it really easy for people to submit ideas. Because once you go beyond the core team, now you're going to start reaching out to the rest of the organization, asking them to submit ideas. So put your conversion rate optimization hat on and use that internally. Only ask for things that are absolutely needed, right? And the easiest way we found ourselves is to ask for just a simple sentence. If we do this, then we expect that because of X, Y, Z. The because part is critical because, no pun intended, because once you start thinking through that reason behind it, even if you have an idea, sometimes I'll get an idea. It's like, oh, that'd be great if we did this, then we might be able to do X, Y, Z. But then I look for because, and then I realize that it's not going to work. Right? So it's going to help folks curate their own ideas better, but it will also help you understand where they're coming from when you read those things, right? And that's the initial thing. So don't ask for more than that. We used to ask for a list of assumptions. If you've ever looked into a strategic argument course that's taught in Stanford University, Professor Jesper Sorensen talks about the assumptions that surround the hypothesis. Because the hypothesis, the idea for an experiment will only work if the assumptions become true, right? So you have to outline the assumptions, you have to go through this lengthy process. What we realize is just it's too much. Don't worry about that. Just use logic, if, then, because. Once you scale past and get really into complex personalization use cases where you're doing some multivariate testing, some behavioral testing, that's when you can start bringing those things in. For now, keep it simple. But if you are curious about the logical argument for hypothesis, how to curate hypothesis logically, look them up. Jesper Sorensen, Stanford University. So if you work in an office environment, post QR codes, that worked out well. How many times have you had an idea and sort of made a mental note about it, and then just to forget it later, right? So post QR codes everywhere, people can scan and just quickly submit those ideas. With audio recording that's transcribed, just make it easy. Put that conversion head on. Make learning, sharing part of regular calls. If you're a remote organization, like us, for instance, as a Psycho partner, every Friday, the status calls, for instance, forecast calls that we do, we start off with, what have you learned this week? What are the new things that you learned? So we're constantly promoting that culture of curiosity. And last thing I would point out, turn your teams into survey machines. pull that information from multiple sources, right? There's some things that are going to be ad hoc, let's say conferences, right? Certain conferences you don't attend always, right? So certain news that comes out. However, there's some things that are repetitive. For instance, for us as a Psychor partner, what we do is we survey Psychor in many ways. We ask them, hey, what are the other partners are doing, right? What are they doing well? What can we learn from them? What have you noticed about what we're doing that we could improve? And these are the things that we're just doing on a quarterly basis. These are the same questions that we continue to ask to check ourselves, right, to bring that information in. So there's some tips. Now that we have the ideas flowing, right, so let's talk about the process of curating this. And this is very, very interesting and very simple. It's very tactical. So the first test that you want to put ideas through is the logical argument test. So the logical argument test that I was mentioning from Stanford University. To start off, just use simple logic. Don't overthink it. If X, then Y because, right? So as long as it makes sense, it's validated. As long as it does not, if it doesn't make sense, if the because does not make sense, or there's so many variables or so many things that have to be true for that hypothesis, for that idea to be successful, discard it, right? Or perhaps push it through additional fine-tuning, right? If you think that there's something there. Once we validate the hypothesis, then we need to figure out which one do we start off with first. And that's where the ICE framework comes into play. So ICE stands for, again, impact, confidence, effort. So we score this on the scale from 1 to 10. And you can see on the right side, it's a bit small, but we see is valid right there. And then let me see if I can use this. So is valid column right here. And then we have impact, confidence, and effort there being cut off. But we score from 1 to 10, 1 being lowest, 10 being highest, on the impact of the idea to the goal, to the KPI that we're tracking. Confidence, our confidence in this idea actually working. Subjective. Effort is the effort that it will take to implement the experiment. Okay? So, and once we've scored the ideas, what we want to do is we want to filter first by lowest effort, highest impact, and then subjective confidence applied on top of that. So what we're effectively fishing here for is the lowest hanging fruit. So don't go for the biggest impact. Go for the lowest effort, no matter what the impact is. Lowest effort, quick wins. That's what we want. And that's gonna help you expedite the flywheel. Although we want to go, the knee-jerk reaction will be to go for the biggest impact. Oh, that's the biggest prize I can win. Go for the smallest, lowest hanging fruit, because we want to get that wheel turning. Your initial year is going to be all about learning how to turn that wheel. So move faster through the process. That's the priority. Now, once you start scaling that to the organization, once you start moving beyond the core marketing team, you realize that you're going to have other problems. So as much as you can convert, you have the inflow of the ideas, you have the way to curate them, the wheel starts spinning and turning, and all of a sudden you realize that you're out of budget. Scaling personalization is expensive, requires a lot of testing, manpower, especially if you have a good problem of a lot of ideas, a lot of hypotheses to test. And then you realize that you start getting attached to some of those ideas personally as you start implementing them, right? And what ends up happening is you start experimenting yourself to the grave out of your budget. So all you're doing is all your time is going into experimentation, or your team's time is going into experimentation. And when we started seeing that, we started digging into it, and it really comes back to people. People become biased. So when something doesn't work and they're attached to it emotionally and personally, if they really believe in that experiment, oh, that's a great idea, we should definitely do this. They roll that out, and especially if those folks who observe the progress of experiments, they get attached to it. So when something doesn't work, they come up with a tweak to add to the experiment and rerun it and try to rerun it again and again and again and again, because they get so committed and bought into the experiment. This is going to be even a bigger problem once you start scaling that across the organization, because once you start getting into thousands of personalization use cases, you would want to bring idea generators into the product to help you set up those personalization use cases. We'll talk about how to set up Psycho-Personalized for that. It's doable. But now that you're moving beyond the marketing team, now those folks, the idea authors, they're going to be even more biased by their idea. So that's going to be even a bigger problem. They're going to want to fight for their idea all the way. If it didn't work, I know it's going to work. We're just got to change this. Let's try this. And you're just iterating. But experimentation costs money. So long story short here, as you start scaling, do the math. That's as simple as that. A really useful metric if you're in business school or if you've done any investment might sound familiar. IRR, internal rate of return. That's a time-based ROI model that's useful and flexible and scalable for experimentation specifically. It has an advantage over ROI. I'll show you here in a simple example. Here we'll have a table with experiment 1 and experiment 2. What you'll find is some experiments will need to run, let's say, for a month. This is a hypothetical time frame, right? But some experiments, to come to a conclusion, will need to run for longer periods of time, right? So you have that difference in time, and you've got to account for that. Simple ROI calculation doesn't account for that, because the ROI just accounts for the final outcome, regardless of the time frame. What we want to do is actually pick the ones that deliver the highest ROI within a period of time, right? So we want to bring a time frame into the picture. And if we use this as an example, this is a simple use case. Let's say it costs us $1,000 in man hours to roll out an experiment. Let's say, a few hours from a few people, right? And we expect through an uptick in conversion rates about hypothetical scenario, right? Simple numbers, $1,200 in profit. We have another experiment that's going to need to run for 2 months. Now, the first experiment would need to run only for a month to get to a statistically significant conclusion. Second experiment would need to run for 2 months. And let's say we're in a cyclical business. Let's say next month we're probably not going to see a whole lot of change, but the month after we're going to have an event. That's really when we're going to be able to test that out, right? And we anticipate a double jump, right? The ROI in both cases is 20%, because the 200, right? 200, the net benefit is 20% of 1,000. 400 is 20% of 2,000. Which one do we pick? Well, that's a disadvantage of our ROI model. So simple IRR, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but simple IRR calculation sets it straight, right? Obviously, we want to pick the one with the highest IRR. And the reason for that is because we're getting 20% within a month, not within 2 months, right? Then we want to set the number of iterations we want to run for an experiment ahead of time to prevent those difficult conversations of people coming up and asking to run another iteration or submitting another idea, similar idea to the idea that they had submitted previously, just to get that experiment back up, right? What we want to do is calculate the number of experiments that we want to run, the number of iterations that we want to run for that experiment ahead of time. We can do that easily by estimating lifetime value of an experiment. Let's say estimate number of years, right? Let's say we're estimating 1,200 a month over a year. Let's say 14,000. Let's say ballpark, finger in the air, right? We're going to say it's probably going to be effective for 3 years, right? So lifetime value is going to be 42,000. Then we're going to multiply that by our confidence from the scoring model previously, right? And then average success rate, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, whatever that is for your organization, right? And at that point, we're going to get the budget, the allowed budget to run the experiment. So let's say the budget is $2,000. Cost of the experiment is $1,000, so we can run 2 iterations on it. That's it, done, set 2, move on. I almost guarantee every time something doesn't succeed, people will come back asking to rerun it, because they'll have a really good and convincing story for why it didn't work. Okay. So we got to control our costs here. All right, so now moving into testing. All right, so this is the execution part, right? So now we've scaled that to the organization. We have an inflow of ideas coming in, right? We have a clear, transparent way of curating those ideas. We have a backlog of experiments. We've aligned on the number of iterations that we want to run for each experiment that we have the budget for, right? So we're ready to get going. Psycho-personalize allows us to do this relatively easily. However, to scale that out to the rest of the organization or to a larger team, you're going to need to set the tool up beyond just a basic rollout and embed code drop, right? So here's some of the things that we discovered that are going to be helpful as you scale it out to the rest of the organization. Remember, the folks who you're going to bring in will not understand, will not know how to work with the tool, so you want to make it as easy as possible for them to onboard on this. Ideally, what you want to do ultimately, what should be the goal, is to allow about 2 weeks between idea generation and the experiment execution. So you want to move through that whole process pretty quickly. So you want folks who submit ideas be able to get their ideas accepted and also roll out their own tests, log into PsychoPersonalize, roll out their own tests using the pre-built templates, connectors, decision models, conditions, segments, just puzzle piece the whole thing together quickly and efficiently. So it only takes 2 weeks to run through the whole process, right? So to do that, you're going to need to bring developers in. And that's part of the reason why I mentioned you do want to have that relationship with development teams, right? So the initial setup will require some time, plus you'll continue pinging them for some of the edge cases. No matter how much you set that up, how many templates you create, you're still going to run into use cases that are going to be more complex. It just doesn't make sense to create something reusable for, because it's just not going to be cost efficient. So you will need to bring developers in ad hoc once in a while. Okay? So web experiments is the easiest way to do experimentation. So use that. Don't look at full stack experimentation if you're specifically focusing on the web, unless performance is critical for you. Okay? So if you cannot afford a slight flicker, if you're counting milliseconds, if you live in the DTC world with e-commerce, milliseconds count. So in that case, full stack experiments is the way to go. However, for quick experimentation, especially for easy experimentation, scaling that out to the organization, use web experiments. Create a library of web templates, similar to how we create components in PsychoXP. If you've ever worked with Psycho Experience Accelerator with XP, you have a library of components. Similar concept. PsychoPersonalize does not have a visual tool that allows us to point at certain elements on the page and select them that way. Hint, hint, if anyone's from Psycho here. So we have to pre-build templates that account for those things. We have to make templates in a user-friendly manner, and it's almost like creating templates for components, specific components. So through templates, we can restrict what components can be experimented with. Through the templates, we can also restrict what people can experiment with. By using user-friendly fields, for instance, in a web template, we can allow them to choose the color, the font size, right? Update the content. Those avoiding having them get into the code and really creating custom experiments, right? Those edge cases will happen, but that's when you need to bring a developer in. Set up connections to back office systems, right? Needless to say, we are going to need to run experiments based on data that we have in other systems, so connections have to be there. A tagging system, although not obvious, but very important for traceability and simple, easy search through experiments and experiences. Tags can be set up based on channel, based on business unit that generated the idea, based on the unit that created the idea, based on the campaign, based on the page, based on the component. So create an easy create a taxonomy of tags that makes sense for your organization that then can be applied to experiments and then later experiences. So you want to carry the same tags over from the experiment to the experiment site. In fact, you want to carry some of those tags all the way from ideation for traceability purposes, right? So, best practices for scaling. So use hypothesis field. There's hypothesis field in PsychoPersonalize for experiments and experiences. Use that field because, one, obviously helps with onboarding folks, helps someone who's looking at the experiment for the first time to understand what it's about. Two, that field is searchable, so it's, again, makes it easier for you to find experiments. Automate website regression testing. Testing is one of the problems with personalization. There is cost benefit to that balance that you'll have to find. So usually a rule of thumb is test core functionality. As you gain more trust and move past the core team, you gain more trust in people creating and releasing experiments into the live environment, and maybe you may or may not get to that depending on the compliance rules that you have to meet, right? So the lucky ones will get to the point where they can scale that out to the organization, where folks outside of the marketing team can come in, create an experiment, and run it on the live site. Sometimes you can't do that, right? But no matter what your situation is, try to automate as much testing as possible. So that, again, that's where developers come in. That's where you need to pull in IT. Use multi-arm bandit to optimize for speed. If you're not familiar with it, it's an algorithm that's part of psycho-personalize, allows to automatically move traffic towards the variant that's generating the higher KPIs, right? The converts the most towards our goal. If you do have a solid opinion, feel free to configure your confidence levels and statistical significance, right? And the buckets in psycho-personalized certain groups. In fact, for some experiments, you will need to do that because you won't be able to run certain experiments at the same time on the same group of users, right? So for those use cases, do use buckets. For most, though, try to use multi-arm as much as possible, especially as you're starting off, right? Especially if you're not a statistician, right? Just make it easy for you. Automate it. And then finally, promote the winners into personalization, and then ideally into a full stack experience. And that's for performance reasons. So web experiences don't perform as quickly as full stack experiences. Full stack experiences require backend integration with psycho-personalized. Again, that's where you're going to need help from IT. So you see that there's more and more reason for having that relationship with them, with the developers, to shortcut that thing, that process. But ultimately, that's in the world of fast loading pages with edge delivery, this is going to make a large impact. So do turn them into full stack experiences eventually. Okay? So at this point, we have ideas flowing in, right? We've scaled it to the organization beyond the marketing team. We're serving the market. We're in the market. We're bringing the knowledge in. We're bringing the learnings in. We have a solid, transparent, streamlined way of prioritizing ideas. And now we know some best practices around rolling out that within personalization. There's some other things that you want to make sure to have, like workflows and approvals, and writing those inside psycho-personalized. Those things will vary depending on your organization. So if you have any questions around, how something like that might look like for you, let me know, here in the Q&A, or we can regroup after. But ultimately, what you'll find is, as your number of personalization use cases grows, you will start seeing your website evolving. And you'll start seeing your website turning into a product. And that really ultimately is the goal. You want to avoid those expensive rebuilds, expensive digital transformations, right? Expensive redesigns. You want to be data-driven. You want to evolve your website into a product. And that is the ultimate goal of personalization and experimentation. Become data-driven. So thank you. On that note, again, if you have any questions about what you just heard, the devil is always in the detail, right? So this is a high-level overview. You can take some of those things and roll them out within your organization, like the ICE framework, the validation argument, right? The templates, the ID intake, some of those quick tips, personalization setup. As you go through the process, you will have questions. So don't hesitate to reach out. Ping me on social. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. Feel free to send me a quick email. I'm always happy to help. This is my personal passion, as I mentioned. This is something that I live and breathe. So there's a lot that I can share with you beyond what you just saw. So, and as always, thank you to our sponsors. And thank you for coming, guys.